Boatworks Today is a viewer-supported show. To learn more on how you can get involved and watch extended, ad-free versions of these videos, please visit our website, boatworkstoday.com, and click on the top of the heading where it says Support This Show. Thank you. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the advantages and disadvantages of both paint and gel coat. And if a restoration project is maybe in your not-so-distant future, which one might be the better choice for you? So stick around. Now, the way that I'm going to be handling this topic is I'm going to break it into 3 short videos. The first video, which is this one, is just going to be doing kind of a general overview, things to consider, the advantages, disadvantages of each of those types of materials. Then in the second video, I'm going to be specifically focusing on, general care and maintenance that, that should be done, say on a painted surface. And then the third video will then be covering that same type of approach, but with gel coat. Now, I want to say up front that this video specifically is going to be very, very wordy. It's going to be all talking. So if that's not your thing or not, you're not really interested in that, that's cool. But there really is no other way to relay the information. So, it is what it is, I guess. You don't necessarily have to hit the dislike button. I mean, there's going to be good information here. So, if it's not your thing, just turn it off. You don't have to show me any hate. Now, as someone that works with both paint and gel coat on a regular basis, I tend to, look at a project maybe a little bit differently than most. Basically, there are 4 key things that I look at specifically when I'm trying to decide, what material to use. The first is going to be durability. The second is going to be, how easy is it to repair? What kind of equipment do I need to do the repair, and what kind of temps am I going to be working in, that sort of thing. The third thing is appearance. I mean, it's got to look good, right? So that is certainly a consideration. One of these materials does have an advantage over the other. And then lastly is maintenance. What is really involved with keeping it looking good? So those are going to be the 4 bullet points that we're going to be talking about today. Durability. I'm kind of looking at that as scratches and scuffs. Now, when you're comparing the difference between paint and gel coat, I mean, there is one obvious difference. Gel coat is much thicker than paint. I mean, gel coat on average, I would say, is anywhere from, say, like a 1/16 of an inch thick up to, maybe in some areas closer to an 1/8 of an inch. Yeah, maybe a little less. Paint, on the other hand, is paper thin. I mean, literally paper thin. It's about as thick as a single sheet of printer paper. So when you're talking about scratches and scuffs, gel coat obviously has, a benefit there. If you get a shallow scratch in some gel coat, there's a good chance you're going to be able to wet sand it and then just buff it out and it'll disappear. With paint, a scratch is a scratch. I mean, it's such a thin material, if it gets heavily scuffed or scratched, it's going to show. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Now, another aspect of durability that should be taken into consideration is how well do they stand up to chemicals? And by chemicals, I'm talking about things that you're typically going to see on a boat. Gasoline, diesel, kerosene, denatured alcohol, those sort of things. Both of them do a pretty good job. But there is one thing to consider is, gel coat is more porous than a paint surface. And where that somewhat comes into play is when you're talking about staining. Oil stains, oil, whether it be engine oil or suntan oil, wine, bird poo. Gel coat tends to take on stains easier than paint. Paint, I think, kind of shines a little bit more in that respect. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in respect to durability is how well does it age? How long does it last? And by that, I'm referring specifically to color retention. How quickly is the color going to fade? Gel coat fades pretty quickly. It starts to oxidize as soon as it's brought out into the sun. A brand new boat launched in the spring it may not be noticeable to the eye until you have to do a repair using some factory matched gel coat. Within a season or 2, that factory matched gel coat is going to be off. Now, paint doesn't really suffer from that same type of problem. If you have a boat painted and you have to go back and do a touch-up on it, 2, 3, 4 years later, a brand new can of paint is going to match that hull, even after that amount of time. Repairability. How easy is it to fix each of these materials? And this is going to tie in directly with what we just talked about with color retention. Because the first part of any finishing, of finishing a repair is going to be getting your color right, the color matching process. With Gelcoat, that can be a very tricky and intimidating thing. For someone trying to figure this out on their own for the first time, it can be a very, very frustrating process. When you're talking about repairing paint, as I had mentioned a minute ago, a freshly painted boat is going to look pretty much the same 2, 3, 4 years later. So if you get a can of that same paint, new, you put it on a 3 or 4 year old hull, it's going to work. It's so simple. It's so simple. And that is, for someone who is gonna, that tends to want to do a lot of the work themselves, to include the maintenance and the repair, that should be something to be given some heavy consideration. Application. How do you apply these two materials? This is another big consideration, and I would say possibly the largest consideration that should be looked at when you're trying to decide which material to use for your project. We're going to start off with Gelcoat. Now, Gelcoat shines when you're talking about small repairs because there's really no equipment that's needed. You mix up your Gelcoat, you can dab it in with a brush or a stick, and it's that simple. Now, when you're talking about large areas, this is where you run into problems. Large areas really need, with Gelcoat, really need to be sprayed. You do not want to try and roll and tip Gelcoat on over a large surface. You'll be setting yourself up for hours and hours and hours of sanding. And with that much sanding going on, you're probably going to be sanding through in spots. So you're going to have to come back and touch it up again. Now, paint. Paint on small areas are easy to do. They're typically best done by spraying, but not with spraying like I was just talking about. The type of spraying that you need to do for small little touch-ups you need a small little pancake compressor, like one of those standard compressors you get from Home Depot for driving nail guns and that sort of thing. A small little pancake compressor and an airbrush. You can do decent size repair areas, basketball size areas with just those two things, and it'll turn out beautiful. Very, very simple and straightforward and easy. But where paint does have a major advantage is that certain types of paints can be rolled and tipped. That is a huge consideration, especially for someone who's trying to do this work in a garage or in someone else's building. There's no overspray. There's no equipment needed. You can roll and tip without having to really, have a lot of equipment or do a whole lot of protective covering. There's no overspray. You don't need to mask things off. It's so simple. But a good roll and tip will look just as good, and in some cases even better than a typical spray job. If a person is not accustomed to spraying, they're going to get better results rolling and tipping. All right, so now you got your material applied. Now you need to finish the repair. What's involved with this? Well, with Gelcoat, you've got a lot of sanding ahead of you. Once you've gone through all your sanding, now you can buff it out. And the buffing process goes pretty quick. It's going over 2-3 times with a buffer and some compound and a coat of wax, and you're done. Now with paint's a little bit easier. Well, actually, it's a lot easier. If you time it right, you lay up your paint and you walk away for 2, 3, 4 days, or a week, a fairly short period of time, but at least 2 or 3 days. In order to finish that off, then you can go at it right away with the buffer. Unless you've got runs and sags and stuff that you need to work out, you can just hit it right away with the buffer with some compound, and you can feather off if there's any dry edges, any overspray. You can just basically wipe those off, blend it in, and your repair is going to look fantastic. So as far as finishing a repair, you've got 1 step versus actually 6 steps with Gelcoat. Appearance. Eye candy, right? We all want it to look like $1 million. And Gelcoat can look very, very good. You know, I'm not going to argue that. As far as gloss and color retention and reflection, paint, just by its nature, is always going to outshine a Gelcoat. That's just how it is. Now, there is certainly more information that could be said, you know, when we're trying to compare and contrast these two materials, but I'm not going to go there. That would make this video just way too long. So I think, at least up to this point, I've covered some of the basic nuts and bolts of, you know, things that you should be thinking about when you're trying to decide what material to be using on your project. Both have their advantages and both have their disadvantages, and you know, you need to kind of weigh those out for what's going to work best for your particular situation. So I'm going to end this video here, and then in the next video we're going to be going over the care and maintenance of paint, and the last video will be that same topic but on Gelcoat. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please feel free to leave them down below in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.